Hello, this is rRats, and I'm logged on at lightchess.org. Going to play against Crafty level 4, playing Fischer random chess. And last game I played was level 3, and it dropped a piece early. I relaxed, and then I discovered I was losing my piece back, and I really had to knuckle down and work. But I finally administered a checkmate on it, worked it all out, and out-tacticked it. Okay, so in this position, it's a new position. Obviously, it looks like White can achieve a more or less normal setup by playing e4, knight g3, knight f3, bishop c4, queen e2, d3, move the bishop on c1 to say e3 for example, and then castle kingside. Okay, so let's kind of start that way and see what happens. Okay, so now it has played that, but that might hang the pawn on f7, make it a little difficult to protect. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is play bishop c4. That attacks the pawn. Well, it doesn't really attack the pawn, actually. The knight on h8 protects it, but it keeps it from developing, at least for the moment. So I'll play bishop c4 here. And if it plays similar, I can play queen e2 and would reach a symmetrical position. Okay, it's not attacking the pawn on e4. My rook is covering it. But what I'm going to do is continue with my plan and get ready to castle kingside. I can always hold the knight on h1 back and develop it later. I do have to watch out if a knight goes to g6 and f4, but I should be okay on that. I could play d3. Oh, there's the center fork trick in here. If I play knight f3, what if it takes and I take with a rook, then it plays d5. Okay, d3 was going to be played eventually anyway. I'll go ahead and do it now. Okay, now it shut its bishop in. That I like. Okay. This should begin to approximate a normal chess position very soon. All that's lacking is getting the rest of the development completed. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now the question is, do I want to take it or drop back and grab the rook file? I think I'll grab the rook file in case it wants to castle queenside. So I'll drop the bishop back and let him trade. Okay. I'm going to play queen e2 here. That was part of the plan. Now it took, and I take back on b3. Okay, now it's playing a5. What's it planning? a4? I'll go ahead and threaten to double up his pawns just for the sake of doing that. Let's see. By bet, I mean bishop g5. And then I'd get a nice square f5 for a knight. Now I could do that now if I so choose. It has lost its option to castle queenside, so I'm going to go ahead and castle kingside and await developments. And it plays d5. That's not a move I'm too worried about. But it's guarding the knight on f6 now. So I'll just let it take on e4 or push by. Okay, so now I'm going to play knight f5 because I can, and I'm not too worried if it plays knight f4. I'll take it with my bishop. And the game looks a lot like a normal chess game all of a sudden. Okay, it's done that. Now I can take it. Now the e file opens up a little bit. My knight would be pinned. What I what I can do is play queen d2 here. That threatens to win a pawn by bishop takes f4. And if it takes on e4, my e-pawn hangs. So what I think I'm going to do is think about this for a few minutes. Let's kind of get an assessment here. Maybe now that we've just about exited the opening, it's time to stop and consider a few things. Okay, the white king is quite safe. The black king hasn't castled yet. Black hasn't completed his development, or its development. I have the open queen-rook file for what it's worth. My queen is under attack. I need to deal with that. That'll be no problem. It's struck in the center by trying to open up the lines. So if I play bishop takes f4, it's got to take back with the pawn, right? Now it's threatening queen takes f5. So how do I deal with that? Well, I can play rook from f to e1, and that takes away the sting of queen takes e4. And if it plays a move like rook e6, now it's crawling all over e4. So what do I do? I could play knight from f to d4. And I can play rook e5. And then I can play f3. I gotta be careful. My knights are kind of doing a little dance here. They're not that safe. f3 secures e4, but it can cause me some problems here. Let's see. Essentially, it could trade pawns and then on e4, and then play g6, and my knight on d4 is embarrassed. So f3 is not necessarily the best move. Okay, so I don't know that its strength on this level. All I know is that it's going to have some tactical skills here. It's going to see combinations, so I have to be on the lookout. Okay, but I'm leaning towards bishop f4. It just feels right. Bishop takes f4 because it just saves that critical tempo. Now I could play queen d2, and what queen d2 it does is it goes after the pawn on f4, and it's not exactly clear how it guards it. It doesn't have to guard it. It can take on e4. This is kind of interesting. If it takes on e4, now my knight's not protected, and I can take queen takes f4, and then it has various moves like knight d5, or let's look at e takes d3 first. Now I can play rook fd1, pinning that pawn, and suppose it tries knight d5. Well, I can take on d3. It takes my queen. I take its queen. I'm on the 7th rank. The game looks about even. Let's see. Rook takes d3. Knight takes f4. Rook takes d7. Now I can't play anything to e7. It has though the tricky move rook f6, but even though that attacks my knight, I can put it on e3 and shut the e file off. Knight to e3. Now its a5 pawn is hanging. It can play b6. If it plays b6, then I can play moves like g3, attacking his knight. Now, anytime he can throw in his wishes of king c8, but the point of g3 is I want to follow up with knight d5. So where is he going to put his knight? Say e6, and then when I play knight I can't play knight d5. My knight on f3 is hanging, but I can play. Can't play knight e5. It has knight c5. Very interesting position. It seems like black's okay here. Wouldn't be losing, but unless it beats me with the bishop versus knight. I just don't think this computer is sophisticated enough to know that. So there's plenty of decent candidate moves in here for black. It's just a question of finding one that keeps some kind of strategic imbalance going, that I can pick up some kind of advantage positionally on it and then just grind it down. Okay. I can play queen e3. The problem with queen e3 is that suppose it plays something like b6 and then plans to play c5. Okay, plays b6. What's my move? c5 is coming, and then I have to go back to e1 with the queen. Bishop c5 is coming, and well, then again, I just take his knight on f4, right? Bishop takes f4. He takes on f4. I take an f4. Now he's crawling all over e4. He's got knight, rook, and pawn on it. So, and my queen might get a little embarrassed trying to guard that knight on f5 after d takes e4. I'm just a little bit loose here. So maybe the idea to take the knight on f4 is good, but maybe black's got enough central activity here that to counter it and not give me the little advantage I'd like to get. So I've got to take care of the queen. That's obvious. So it's either move the queen or take his knight. And when I take his knight, it opens up the e-file. I'm okay without that. If I play queen e1, I'm also, for what it's worth, attacking a pawn on a5, although it's not a pawn I can keep because I'd be giving up protection of e4. Queen e1 actually makes a certain amount of sense here. He could play bishop b4, and if he plays bishop b4, I play c3. Now I'm no longer attacking his pawn, but I've gained that critical tempo. And if he doesn't put his bishop back on f8, let's say he plays bishop c5, then I can grab his pawn on. Oh wait, there's a problem here. I'm just saying I can. It doesn't protect g7, but I just noticed d3 is hanging on bishop b4. So bishop b4, c3. Well, if he plays knight takes d3, I move my queen to, say, e3. Now I'm on his knight, and I'm on his bishop. So where does this bishop go? Bishop c5, I take his knight, then he plays d takes e4. I play queen takes, check. No, it's not check, but he's got to retake. Knight takes, and my knight on f3 is hanging, but I'm a piece ahead. So I just carefully play knight d2, and I win. So queen e1 may be the move here. And just preserve the option of taking his knight on f4. Okay, so queen e1 is kind of an ugly move simply because it shuts the rook in, but the queen doesn't have to stay there. And I don't know exactly how this level thinks. It's more of an exploratory game. I'm going to keep playing this thing until it starts beating me, which it will eventually if it's full strength Crafty. And I'll try to get down to a level where I can score at least 50%, about 50% with it to keep the games entertaining. Okay, so queen e1. I don't mind so much if it takes on e4, because I take on e4 with my pawn, and then I've secured the knight on f5, and bishop b4 has a little less sting because I won't be dropping a pawn on d3. Okay, but let's just look at it. Bishop b4, c3, knight d3 anyway. Now the knight's guarded on e3, or d3, so queen e2, and now it could play bishop f8, guarding its pawn. Then I can pin his knight, and he loses it. Okay, I'm going to settle on queen e1. I think it's got some merit to it. Queen e1, and it took with the pawn, so I need to take with the pawn on e4. And now I'll play bishop b4 anyway. So we've got what we've seen. Now we're more or less obligated to play c3, and I'm on g7 for what it's worth. Let's see what it comes up with here. And it played knight d3. Okay, so wow, it's playing right into what I looked at. So I just play queen e2 here, and his bishop's under attack, and I'm threatening to pin his knight, or its knight. So queen e2, and I don't mind if it plays knight f4 because I just take it with my bishop and take his bishop. And well, there's a little trick here though. Let's see. On queen e2, he plays knight f4. I play bishop takes. It plays pawn takes. Now the moment I take its bishop, I've got triple pawns and it can take my knight. So maybe what I do instead is knight takes g7, and I'm on his rook too. Yeah, I'm on his rook and his bishop. Then it plays rook takes e4, and I'm still on his bishop. That's what's neat about this. And I can play something like queen d2, and if it trades queens, then I'm on its rook and its bishop. If it moves its queen away, I take its bishop. So maybe that does it. Gets tricky. I'm probably playing too quick, but I think I've done it accurately. Queen e2, now play bishop c5. Okay, so there's a pin on the knight on d3 available. It's got some counterattacking possibilities on f2, but I'm not too worried about those. Just have to examine the candidate moves and find the correct path. Okay, so let's see. What are the candidate moves here? I can take on g7, or I can pin his knight with my rook. Now the question is, which rook? Well, obviously the one on a1, because otherwise f2 is loose. So if he sacks on f2, he tries to unload his two pieces on f2, I have recourse here. Okay, so rook ad1. If he plays knight takes d2, now he's threatening discoveries. But probably I can just allow those discoveries and take his queen directly, and I don't think he gets enough here. Okay, rook takes d7. Just for the sake of argument, let's try knight takes e4 check first. Now I need to get the king out of check. One way is king h1, knight e3 is the other. But now his knight on e4 isn't protected, so after knight takes d7, I take on e4. So he doesn't want to play knight takes e4 check. He could play, yeah, he can't give up the queen. Knight g4 check, king h1, knight takes rook, and I have a queen. I've taken his queen for a rook, bishop, and pawn. So that's almost an even deal. But g7 is hanging, and he doesn't really have enough to go go in with knight f2 check again. I'll take it off with my rook. Okay, so that leaves bishop takes g2 or f2, and I've ended up having to put my king on f2 in this, because otherwise my queen is overworked a little bit holding on to f2, and I'll show you that. Back from this position here, if I play rook ad1 and it plays bishop takes f2 check. Oh wait, no, that's, yeah, it's not with check. Bishop takes, I just take the rook. Okay, where was that overworked line then? Because when it plays knight takes rook, I just play queen take, or rook takes queen. I don't have to take on f2 with the king. So let's see, knight takes f2. Oh, I know where it was. On knight takes f2, if I want, I can also play rook takes f2, and instead of taking its queen. So then bishop takes f2, king takes f2, and what do I have here? I have two pieces for the rook, and his queen is on loose, and I'm threatening g7. So either of these is fine. Okay, rook ad1, and let's see what it does. It took on e4, so it's giving up a piece, but f5 is under attack, so I have to be careful here. You know, the difficulty I ran into in level 3 was it dropped a piece early and I relaxed when I shouldn't have. Here I'm trying to take it more seriously, and it looks like it's dropped a piece again. So level 4 may not be all that strong, but I know it's capable of doing things. So now f5 is under attack, and if queen takes f4, if it plays, or e4, it plays knight takes f2. Now it's on my queen, but I'm on its queen, but it's going to get my queen with check. But I think I'm up a piece here. Rook takes d7, knight takes e4 check, king h8, and what does it have? You can try for the draw with knight f2 check, but suppose I just play rook takes f2, and then it plays bishop takes f2. Now which pawn do I want? I'm on his 7th rank, I have two knights for the rook. It has two pawns for the moment, but his pawns are falling. The pass pawn on e4 is just not going to be fast enough, I don't think. I can blockade that pawn before it becomes dangerous. How about simply just knight takes g7, which attacks his rook, and I'm prepared to answer rook g8 with rook takes f7, picking up another pawn. Now it tries to threaten mate with rook d6. I break that with g3. Suppose it tries rook g6. Now it's attacking my knight on g7. If I move the knight on g7, it can in turn give back two pieces for the rook. Where am I going to move it to? Knight f5. And it plays rook takes g5. And you know what? I don't want to put it on f5, because if I keep the g file open, or to keep the f file open, I'm on its bishop at the end of all this. And there may be a more precise way to do this. I'm pretty sure my move is queen takes e4, and we'll reanalyze this. I don't think it can improve on it, but let's see. When he puts his rook on g6 and is attacking both my knight on g7 and threatening to take off the two pieces for the rook, suppose I find a different square for the knight, h5, for what it's worth. Let's see. Now it takes on g5. I take his rook. He takes mine. Oh, I'm end up going to this with a slightly worse of it. Maybe rook takes f2 and rook takes my knight on h5. And I have an outside pawn majority. Wow, this is interesting. But I have a feeling I can improve my play. I'm pretty sure somewhere in this long, lengthy line that I just gave. I give the whole line simply because it's the first look through, and a lot of time, well, against a computer, you really have to be precise. You have to look pretty much at every variation, because guess what? The computer looked at every variation. As humans, you don't always have to see every single possibility, because of all the branches of the trees of analysis, they're just going to get lost in everything. And my experience is that unless the opponent you're playing is playing at above 2400 strength, they're just not going to see every line that you see. And if you can really dig deep into these things, then you're playing at least 2400 strength. And that's what I'm attempting to do here, is play at 2200 strength and demonstrate that or 2400 strength, demonstrate that these silicone beasts can be outplayed if you're careful. So my only other candidate move here is to take on, well, rook takes d3 is not a candidate move. He just takes on f5, and I don't win back the piece on e4. So I'll just play here and see how close we get to what it might do. And there it did. It took the knight on f2. I mean, knight took on f2, so he's on my queen, and he's going to get my queen back with check. But as I say, I have a decent game here. I'm now ahead a piece for 2 pawns. That's the compensation that it has. It does have 2 pawns for the piece it's given up, and I can start winning a little bit more pawns, perhaps. So my queen's under attack. I've got to deal with that. I do not have time for rook takes f2 here, because he will take on d1. My rook on d1 is hanging, And so just to show you, rook takes f2, and queen takes d1. Now I'm kind of embarrassed. I'm going to lose my rook on f2 to a bishop, and I'll have 3 minor pieces for 2 rooks, and he'll have some extra pawns, so that's not enough. So I'm pretty much forced at this point to take its queen, and allow it to take my queen. There's really nothing else I can do about it. Let's just take a deeper look to be certain. Okay, what are my other choices here besides taking its queen? Well, it's on my queen, so I'd have to move my queen. Does it have a good square? Then it's going to take a rook with check, right? Knight takes d1, discovered check. And then I'm down material. No, I have to take its queen and see what it does. Okay, so I'll take its queen, it'll take my queen, and now I have to play... No, I don't have to play it. I can play bishop e3 here. See, earlier I was looking at king h1, but now I have a new option here. Okay, I do have a piece for 2 pawn advantage now, and I am attacking on the 7th rank, something it's going to have to deal with. So right now, theoretically, I do have a winning game, although I am in check. Okay, so do I have to get greedy? That is the question. Do I need to get greedy here and try and gobble all those pawns, or do I have enough here to win with the advantage of a piece for 2 pawns? And theoretically, I should have enough. I should be able to just stop winning pawns right now and plan on winning those pawns later when they're going to be weak and available. Okay, so as I say, what I can do here now is play bishop e3, which puts the question to his bishop, and if he takes, my bishop, my knight on f5 comes back and takes his bishop, and this is avoiding a lot of the complications that I was in that long-winded variation that I had before. I said I could probably improve my play, and here it is. This may do it because now I'm attacking his f7 pawn. He still has to deal with that. If it plays rook f8, he's hanging e5, and they'll have a piece for a pawn advantage. And if it plays rook f6, then it seems that I can play rook d5, and I'm forking 2 pawns. I'm forking the pawn on e5, and I'm on the pawn on a5. So this seems to make sense. On bishop e3, I don't really see what else it does. I think this is fine. Okay, bishop e3, and we'll go from there. Of course, there's one tricky move before I do that. Suppose I just noticed a little tactic. Okay, do you see the tactic I'm looking at from this initial position? If I play bishop e3, okay, the tactic is that, see, its bishop on c5 is protected. It's protected by its knight on e4. So suppose it plays g6. And the purpose of that is to undermine my knight, right? And if I play bishop takes c5, it in turn plays knight takes c5. Now look, my rook on d7 is under attack, and my knight on f5 is under attack. So there's a wrinkle in the armor here. If I move my rook, my knight falls. If I move my knight, my rook falls. So which is going to be? Well, I could play rook d5 in this position. Now I'm back on its knight, and if it takes my knight, I take its knight. So if it doesn't take my knight, it plays knight takes b3. Now it's collected a third pawn for the piece. And my knight is still under attack. Okay, so this should still be in white's favor, but it's just a little bit less so. So I'm on his pawn on e5 for what it's worth, but I don't have time to take it. But suppose I go and attack another pawn here with knight h6. Okay, knight h6. Oh, the knight's a little bit out of play. What's it going to do? Knight h6, it's going to play... could play e4, counterattack, get its pawn running. Yeah, I don't like that as much. Knight e3 is a better move in that position, because then I'm still threatening e5, and it's got to deal with it. It could do it by f6, which certainly seems logical. Very interesting position. White's ahead a piece for 2 pawns, but must play carefully. I can't play knight e3 in this position to interpose because it just takes my bishop, and my bishop is guarding my knight. So it's just time to sit here and work out the variations, treat this as if it was a correspondence game and I have a chance to analyze the position and take a little extra time here because the computer is going to play accurately. Its skill level isn't all that bad here. You know, the question is, did it see enough deep into the position to justify giving up the material it did? And certainly it's a long-winded variation. One question is, did the computer peter out when it reaches its horizon effect? In other words, at one point it can only see so deep. It can't see anything beyond that. Everything beyond that's invisible. And now it'll start to see those things as they get closer, but it'll just be in a bad shape. So maybe I've gotten it out of its horizon effect already. So the key move here is, do I play king h1? Okay, if I play king h1, what if it checks on f2 with his knight? Now it's just going to go back and forth and call a draw. So here I would have to take on f2, and it plays bishop takes f2. Now I have 5 pawns, it has 7. I have 2 knights for the rook, but I'm on its 7th rank. This is what I was looking at earlier. Let's look at it again and see if we can improve on this. Before I had it getting some tactical possibilities against trying to regain the 2 pieces for the rook. I was playing knight takes g7. Suppose I play rook takes f7 instead. Now I have threats on g7 still. It could try a move like e4, get the pawn running. Now it would like to follow up with shoving that pawn a little further, so we stop that. Knight d4. Now if it pushes it again to e3, I have knight e2. Now the pawn is stopped in its tracks, but I need to get my king out of any potential danger. Let's say it plays materialistic and ignores material and tries to get on the 8th rank. Well, it's going to be hard because its rook can't get to d8 or d6. So suppose I just try g6, just going to start kicking that knight out. Got to find better squares. Knight d4. Now c5. Now finally the knight I can put the knight on b5 here and won't get to d6. Here I'm trying to get that knight, trying to find a way to get his rook to a d file, and I don't see it. So suppose it comes up rook e5. Well, rook e5 fails. I have bishop f4, and I've pinned it. against this king. So rook takes f7 may be a better choice, and this would be a good illustration, a good example of using two minor pieces against the rook. Eventually I'm going to surround and capture the pawn on e3 and try and snag another pawn before I do that. I'm going to try this line. I think it's a good line, because the other one just seems, let me just verify it one more time. What I was saying was, if I play bishop e3, it has that tricky move g6. Unless I'm missing something, let's go ahead and give that one more look over. I knew I could improve on the original analysis, but the new one with bishop e3 is a little tricky. Let's see if I can improve on it. So b3, the move I had it playing was g6, and I've got to find, I guess I have to take its bishop. I'm pretty much forced. And now it takes my bishop on c5. Of course, it could also take my knight. But I'm a piece ahead. I move my bishop. I move my bishop out of there, and I remain a piece ahead. So it has to take my bishop. Now it's on my rook, and then I can play rook takes f7 instead of rook d5. I was playing rook f7 or rook d7 earlier. Now it needs to take my knight on f5, and I play rook takes f5, and material is even. It can go a pawn up with knight takes b3. It can shove its pawn to, it can, e4, rook takes knight, pawn takes knight. I'm going to be a pawn ahead there. But it seems to me like if it just plays knight takes b3, that the game is very even. Okay, I'm going to try for the 2-for-1 and see what happens. Okay, king h1. And it did. Okay, now rook takes. And it takes. And this is the position where I said I would be playing rook takes f7. Okay, so my candidate moves here are rook takes f7 and knight takes g7. And knight takes g7 eventually ran into a little difficulty because his rook was, he gets his rook on, one rook on g8, the other one swings over to g6. That was the way he was getting back his material. So for the moment, black is actually material ahead on a pure point count chess. I have 5 pawns, it has 7, so I've given up a rook and 2 pawns for 2 knights, but I get 1 pawn back right now, and it's just a question of which one do I want. And that's what we're trying to answer, is that which one do we want? And eventually at some point it may be able to play rook b3 or rook b6 and rook takes b3, so I need to be collecting some pawns here, something I didn't notice until just now. But I'm sure that if it comes up, the computer won't forget about it. It's trained to find this stuff. Okay, so it's got a passed e-pawn, but I have enough minor pieces to neutralize that. I'm not too worried about it running. The drawback with knight takes g7 is it just puts the knight a little further out of play. So just on a pure instinct basis, even though it attacks another pawn, it just doesn't smell right. I'm gonna take rook takes f7 because it keeps the rook on the 7th. It keeps threatening more pawns, and it makes the black position react. And as I've said, I've covered his d-file squares. He can't get his rooks active, so rook takes f7 is the correct choice. And there it played. Rook takes, or rook g6 after all. So what's it threatening? Anything I should worry about? Okay, again, from a pawn count, the position is even. I have 2 knights for I have 2 knights for a rook, or getting up a rook and a pawn for 2 knights. That's what I've done, and it is attacking nothing. It's defending on g7, which is under attack. So this is the position where I said that it could transpose. If I play knight takes g7, this is the position I was looking at earlier at. It comes back. It comes with rook e g8, and now my knight is under attack. Of course, I have a new move here that I didn't. No, it's not really a new move. Bishop f6. The bishop just gets overworked, or the rook on f7 is overworked. He plays rook takes f6, and I play rook takes f6, and it takes my knight. And I play knight takes e5, and I'm a pawn ahead. That's interesting. Maybe bishop f6 is a possibility, because I'm threatening to take on e5 and winning another pawn. So let's see. Rook takes f6. He plays. I play rook takes f6. He takes my knight on g7. I take the knight on e5. Now it gets tricky. He has rook e7, and he's going to get down on my 7th rank. Knight f3 or knight d3. Knight d3 might make more sense. Knight d3 keeps an attack on his bishop. And I've stopped rook e1. And he can't play rook e2 here because I'm double attacking his bishop, so he has to save his bishop. He puts it on, we'll just put it on b6 for the sake of argument. And I can't move my king. And he's trying to play rook e3. He's got a lot of activity here. I'm only up a pawn, and let's see, I'm only up a pawn, and well, I can play h3 here, and if he plays rook d3, or I'm sorry, rook e3, I can play rook f3 and chase him out, because I'm happy to trade rooks in this situation. I'll end up with a it won't be a my pawns will be isolated, but I'm going to end up with one isolated one anyways, a passed one. It'll just be on the F file instead of potentially the G file. White should be able to win that. Bishop f6 might not be a bad move, so let's and return the 2 pieces for the rook to win a couple more pawns and go into that winning ending. Although, as I say, when you can, you try to want to hang on to 2 pieces for the rook. It's just common sense. When you can maintain 2 pieces for the rook, it's just a long-lasting advantage, and two pieces really do own a rook. So the one thing to do is just go back and let's get rid of his good bishop that he has. Okay, if I play bishop e3. I think he has to trade bishops here because he doesn't really have anything else. If he plays bishop takes, I take with my knight. Now I've got my 2 knights for the rook, and he has a passed pawn, but it's not going anywhere. Period. I've covered the d2 entry square, so even though he can get a rook to the d file or with either rook here, he's not going to go to d2, and he's not going to go to d1. He could go to d3, but let's see, it's his move. Suppose he plays rook d8, and I play king g1, and he plays rook d3, and I play king f2. There's some tricks here. If he plays e4, the idea is to chase my knight out so he can get on the 7th. If I play king e2, he can take my pawn, my knight on f3 with check. I take his rook, and he takes on g2 with his pawn, and suddenly I have to give up my knight for his pawn, because otherwise it's queening. So there's some resources in here. Like I say, I'm trying to decide if I should trade bishops, and I'm looking at anything it can do, anything and everything it can do afterwards. And objectively, one nice thing about having the bishop on g5 is that it keeps his rook off d8, and that's what he needs. He needs some kind of activity. His only compensation, at least for now, for the giving up 2 pieces for the rook, is that my king is out of play. So I'm trying to get it back into play. So let's look at that again. Bishop e3, and we trade. Now he wants to go to was it d8? Yeah, it was d8. Rook d8, and his idea is to play rook d3, and well, what I can do on rook d8 is just play maybe knight takes e5. Now I'm on his rook on g6, so he's got to deal with that. Suppose he tries rook e6, and then it can get tricky here. Knight c4, he gets moves like b4 or b5, and on a move like knight e5 to g4, he gets a tricky move h5. So snatching the pawn is probably not wise. Okay, the other choice would be rook f5, but then suppose he tries g6 anyway, and then rook g5, and then h6, and I end up losing my knight. So the e5 pawn is a little dangerous, but it's isolated, and the idea is to win it on my terms, not on his or its. So when it gets the rook to d8, I have a king that's out of play, and I was trying to get him activated. My rook's about as activated as I can get it. It's kind of hard to see how to improve its position. Well, I could play rook e7 here. Yeah, that makes sense. Rook e7. Now e5 is hanging, and if he goes, yeah, absolutely, rook e7. If he plays rook d3, I just take on e5 with the rook, and my knights are doing a fine job of covering the 7th rank and the 8th rank, his 7th and 8th rank. So here I'll just follow up carefully with king g1 and king f2, and there's nothing he can do. So rook d8 fails for him in that position. So he's got to deal with the threat on his e-pawn, and so he can't take his rook off the e-file. If he swings the other rook over to d8 or d6, if anything, I can just take on g7. Now what's he got? Rook d3. The idea is to bother my knight. Where's my knight go? Knight f1. Then he plays e4. Ooh, could get a little dangerous. I don't need to grab pawn just yet. On rook d6, suppose I just go back to my original plan of king f1 or king g1. Now rook d3, and it plays or rook d3, I play king f2. Now e4, the sting is taken out of it, because now the difference is we've switched rooks. So now I do have king e2, and when it takes on e3, oh wait, there's something here. Let's see, maybe not. E takes f3, king takes d3. Now its idea f2 fails, and if it takes on g2, that fails, and if it plays rook takes e3, king takes e3, and when it takes on g2 with its pawn, I just take on g7, and I've stopped it. He no longer has a rook behind it because he switched rooks. Okay, so this seems to be a logical winning path. His bishop is a little potent. It is restricting my king, and I don't really want to move those kingside pawns at all yet. The only way to get the king active is without moving the pawns is to get his bishop off that diagonal. And what better way than to get it off the diagonal by just trading it? And two knights do fine against a rook. It's really remarkable how they work out. Okay, so one last look through before I make the move. The other alternative is to keep the bishop. How can I keep the bishop? Well, it's not really attack, but he is threatening to play e4, undermining it. So it's going into the other lines at best left me with a pawn ahead and a bishop, my knight versus his bishop ending. So I'm going to play bishop e3 and let it figure out what it's going to do. I imagine it's going to take. Yeah, it did. And now I take back, and let's see what it does. Okay, I don't think that's its best choice to push. And I may have covered it briefly, but let's just consider about it. I do have his pawn covered. It's blockaded with the knight on e3. Now before I was keeping, in the other variations, I was keeping that knight on e3, but or both of them on the third rank. But now I have to move one away. So the question is, where do I move it? The most logical place to move it is to d4. And the point about going to d4 is that unless he kicks it with c5, that knight is going to stay there, and will have successfully set up a blockade of the pawn. And now it's just a matter of coordinating my three pieces, my rook and two knights, to go and surround that pawn and win it, and then demonstrate the win on the rest of the board. Okay, even though it can play a move like c5, that might just allow me to go into safe mode here with knight from c2 or knight from d4 to c2. Now the knights are more or less self-protecting, and he's not going to get at me too easily. So I think logically the best move is knight d2. I'm sorry, knight d4. Is the main thing I have to worry about is, do I accidentally get back rank mated? And I don't think I will. And it's also since my rook's active on the 7th rank, he can't just start arbitrarily running his rook around the board without some possible repercussions. Okay, so knight d4, and it did play rook d8. Now it's time, I think, to get my king a little closer. By getting my king a little closer, I take away certain things that it would like to do. But before I do that, let's just anticipate him playing c5 to try to open up the some entry squares on the d file. Okay, the knight on e3 that I have is more or less pivotal to my position here, because what it's doing is it allows my king a little freedom of action. It's securing the pawn on g2. Okay, so that's its main focus right now. It's blockading a pawn and it's securing on g2. So this doesn't give black targets. So if I play king g1 and it plays c5, now I play knight from d4 to c2. Now it can go to the 7th rank, but he's not going to get much farther than that because, okay, he puts it on the 7th rank with rook d2. Now I play king f1. And if you notice, his rook is going to get kicked out. Well, maybe not. He can play rook. Well, it costs him. It costs him to kick my knight out. I mean, to double his rooks because I'm on the 7th rank and I'm going to win those pawns. But here I have a fine blockade set up, and it could try to gambit. Doubling the rooks on the d file doesn't do any good for it. What it's got to do is go for some counterplay on the queen side. Rook b3. Just give up those pawns. Okay, rook b6. Rook takes g7. Rook takes b3. Now its pawns look a little dangerous. Okay, now I play rook takes a7. h7. It plays rook takes b2. Now the question is, can it give up its rook for the 2 knights and have anything here? And maybe it does. Okay, b4, g4. Let's just try a4, just for the sake of trying something. G5, a3, and getting a little scary here. I might have to give up, take the pawn. Now it's got some tricks, rook checks on f2, king over to g1. I don't know. I don't think it can to push a3. But once again, I'm in no major hurry here to make a move. None of this is forced yet. But it seems to me that this is going to take a while to win this. I believe the win is there, but it's going to take a while. It's going to have to be very precise. Again, we don't. Its weakness. It's allowed me to get this kind of position. A normal computer wouldn't let even a reasonable human get 2 pieces for the rook against it. It just wouldn't. So maybe the thing to do. Well, it's kind of slow. Okay, I really want to stop its counterplay that I just demonstrated. I don't really need to take it that far out, because it can give up the rook for the 2 minor pieces in that line very easily, and even though I have a pawn advance, so does it, and it can get critical in a hurry. So let's just say that line once more, as I got a little off the beaten track with a tree of analysis offspring from the other. If I play king g1 and it plays c5, and I play knight d4 to c2, and it tries rook b6, and rook takes g7, it goes rook takes b3, and I take on g7, and it takes on b2, and I push g5, and it goes to d2 with his other rook, and I push g5. Now it trades rook takes c2, knight takes c2, rook takes c2. If anything, it's getting ready to take another pawn, but I don't know, my pawn's kind of far advanced here. Even though it's got a bunch of pawns, it just may not get back in time. And there's possibilities to get that pawn up to g7 and stick the rook on h8. It doesn't have time to run its own a pawn because I'll queen in a hurry. a5, g6. I'm queening with check. a3, there, check. But then again, how do I stop its pawn? It gets tricky. Okay, so it's one of those things that I can probably improve the analysis on, but what I have to do here is find my best move. What's my best move? I don't know. That's why I'm working on it. The candidate move was king to g1 to get the king into play, And then the question is, will it try to undermine my defense of the pawn on b3 with c5 and rook b6? And that's a pretty deep continuation for a computer, although of course we know computers can do it. But on level 4, I don't know what its horizon effect is, and I'm not trying to beat it because of its horizon effect. I'm trying to beat it because of its skill level. Theoretically, if you can outthink a computer on its horizon effect and have that position that wins at the end of it, if you know the horizon effect, you can win. There was a short story called 64 Square Madhouse, written by science fiction writer Fritz Leiber, who was also about a mid-1800 rated player. It's in a short story collection called A Pail of Air. And although the story was written way back, probably the 40s or 50s, it really told the future nicely. The story told about a computer that was entered in an event and against a bunch of international grandmasters, and he had taken real chess players' names and kind of changed them around a little bit to fit the characters. Bobby Fischer became Willie Angler, Angler being a Fischer. Reuben Fine became Isaac Smart. Savielli Tartakower became Krakatower, and I don't remember all the other names, but everybody had their own unique approach to how to play against the computer. And I think the way Willie Angler treated it was really prophetic. Was he said that he worked out a variation. He knew the computer could see, say, 10 moves ahead. I don't remember exactly. And he worked out a variation where once the computer got into it, it was stuck, it couldn't get out. But the problem was, on move 11, the computer would be busted, and it couldn't deviate. And that's exactly how he beat it. And another guy beat the computer because there was a power outage, and the computer's clock kept ticking, and they were trying to get the computer back up, and finally when it started again, it had to rush its moves, and because it had to rush its moves, it just couldn't calculate deep enough, quick enough, and its skill level went down. But like I say, it's what's the computer's horizon effect. It's not at its maximum at level 4, but I'm not trying to beat it because of its horizon effect. I'm trying to beat it by just playing good moves. So one candidate moved to try to, well, I can't play b4 because he takes it. The idea of b4 would be to stop c5. If it's going to play c5, it's going to play c5. Maybe what I can do on king g1 on c5, I can do something I suggested earlier and play knight b5. The point of knight b5 is that I've got threats of my own on his back rank. He can't put a rook on the 7th rank because he gets checkmated. And if he tries to drive the knight away with rook b6, I can play c4 and anchor that knight in, and he still can't go to the back rank. So a long story made short, king g1 is my best move, and I consider what it does next. Okay, and it played c5 directly. Good. Okay, that's what we want it to play. We want it to play its best moves. But knight b5, I think, has a little wrinkle in the armor. It's going to stop it. Knight b5 stops a lot of what it's doing in its tracks because it can't give up a mate. It's going to have to stop and spend another move to get out of the mate. Let's verify that. Okay, so c5. If I play knight b5, we know it can't advance its rook on d8 to the 7th rank or 3rd rank or anywhere, because it gets mated. It's going to have to deal with the possibility of getting mated. Now, if it plays b6, that takes away a potential entry square for its rook on g6 to attack my pawn on b3. So its most likely move could be rook king c8. And king c8 is flawed because I can play rook c7 check, and it has to go back to b8, and then I take its pawn on c5 with my rook. Now, it's true here his rook can get to the 7th rank, but we're a little less worried about that. Okay, suppose it puts its rook on the 3rd rank, attacking my knight. Well, here my king can just come up and cover it. Or I can put the knight on c4 and secure the pawn on b2, and I don't think it has enough to push e3 and get that pawn going. So knight b5 is just logically, tactically sound, and you want to look for tactics in the ending and positional things. Anything that slows these mechanical beasts down, sometimes you got to do it. But knight c2 was the other choice. But the drawback that I explained with knight from d4 to c2 is that he puts a rook on the 7th rank and then swings another rook over to the b file and starts winning pawns. So we're trying to win this with 2 knights versus a rook and demonstrate how 2 knights can beat a rook. And instead of playing just a kind of passive defensive approach, I'm going to use the extra piece to play active. And computers can't think, but if they could, I don't think they like active play against them because they just tend to run out of gas. So knight b5 is the move, and it can't activate the rook on d8 because of the back rank threat. So it's going to have to consider sacrificing a couple of pawns on g7 and h7 to somehow try to get over there to b3 with his rook so that it can win something, and I don't think it can. So its other candidate move after c4, oh wow, it doesn't really have anything after knight b5. I just like this move so much. I think it's a great move because it puts the question to its position. It's just tying it up. His king is tied to the back rank, the rook is on d8 is tied to the back rank, and the rook on g6 is tied to defending a pawn. And my king is getting into play, and he's going to get into play here soon. Okay, so there, perfect. It played h6, which, if anything, makes me win that pawn a little later. In other words, if he gives up his rook, or if he gives up his g-pawn, he gets... it takes me a little more work to win the pawn on h6, but it's a critical tempo. It lets my king get just a wee bit closer. Okay, so if I play king f1, I don't mind if he plays, or it plays rook f6 check, because I will take it and put my king on e2, and his rook is not entering my position at all. So the question is, what happens if it plays rook b6? Okay, I play c4. Now I've shut that in. He still can't play rook down to the 7th rank because he gets back ranked. So if he tries king c8, aside from the fact that I can play rook c7 check and win his pawn on c4, I can also put my king on e2, and he is shut off. So the move here is the simple and subtle king f1, and I think I've got this computer beat. Just have to prove it. King e2, king f1. Okay, it did. Good. Okay. Now I will be able to demonstrate how a knight beats 2 rooks. Okay, rook takes, and now king to e2. And as I said, his rook is not coming into my position at all. I've got it shut in. Okay, so now it would be great if I had 2 bishops here. 2 bishops really have a field day against a rook, but knights are not bad themselves. So the first objective here is that what I need to do is coordinate my knights so they attack pawns. Okay. Now, how many weak pawns does he have? Right now he has 4 of them. And b6, e4, f5, and h6. His rook has no entries into my position. For his rook to get an entry into my position, he's going to have to lose a pawn. So I have to be careful which pawn I win. In other words, and he'll try to lose a pawn that lets his rook in. So for instance, he might like to just give you a fantasy line, knight f5, and then he lets me take on h6 so that he can put rook h8 and come down and grab my h pawn if it's all possible. But right now my knight on E3 is done about as well as it can. What I need to do is redeploy my knight on B5. It's pretty much done what it can, and at the moment it doesn't have many squares. It's only got it only has A3 to move to. The alternative is if I play C4. Now, one drawback with C4 is there's some advantages too. It does allow his rook into D3, and it was kind of a fruitless square before. But the advantage of having the rook on D3 is it's attacking my pawn on B3, so I just drop my knight back. Okay, if I just now, I think he's in trouble because next I'm going to play knight from E3 to D5. So what's it going to do? Bring its king up to B7. Then I play knight from E to D5. Now I'm attacking the pawn on F6, and its only recourse is to push that pawn, okay? And then I can play knight F4, and I'm chasing his rook out of the third rank. It can't go to the first rank or the second rank, so his rook has to retreat to, say, we'll just put it on D7. And then I improve my knight's position again. The knight from C3 goes to D5, and wow, my knights have just gotten so much better. Now the knight on D5, that's a great square. I could just leave him there and start maneuvering my king up and coordinate an assault on his pawns. And then I've tied him down to B6, although he could push B5 at some point, but might be his only chance. But eventually I'm gonna be tying down his pawns, and he's just going to have no hope here. It's going to. Okay, so C4 is the move, and we'll work out the rest depending on how it goes. Okay, so it played H5. Now I think I should go about my plan and start, well, if anything, I can play knight D5 here and fork a couple pawns. Is that wise? No, not necessarily, because then he gets some counterplay with rook G2. So I'll go about it the other way. Knight BC3. And plan to sink that knight into D5, and he sees, or it sees, what I'm up to, and it's preparing to stick a rook on E6 to hold everything. But now knight CD5. Okay, now I've got his rook tied down. The next step is to go win a pawn. Now, ideally, I'd like to win that pawn on H5, because doing that gets me a pass pawn, and that would be wonderful to have. I don't necessarily need to win his pawn directly on that's on the E4 square. But suppose I target the pawn on H5. Okay, how can I do it? Well, I can play knight F4 right away. That forks him, and it forces him to play rook E5 unless he wants to give it up, and I don't think he wants to give it up. Then I can swing the other knight into D5. Now I'm attacking the pawn on F6, and that seems to be winning a pawn. You can play rook F5, then I play king E4, and he's going to be lucky if he doesn't get his rook trapped here in a minute. I don't know, let's say king E3. I can just play H5 too, and just tie him all up, and his he has nothing but king moves, and until I relieve the pressure somewhere. Meanwhile, I can play knight to E7, attack his rook, force it to E5, and then put the knight on G8 and swing it around to f6 and eventually surround it. Yeah, I think just knight f4, improve both knights' positions. In effect, what I'm doing is moving my knight from e3 to f4, but I'm doing it in 2 moves. The knights are flip-flopping. Okay, so knight f4 attacking his rook. And now knight ed5 attacking a pawn. And good, now he's pushed his pawn, is exposed a little bit. So I can get the pass pawn now if I pretty much. I mean, I think he's going to lose that h pawn. Let's see if I can get both of them. Okay, what I can do is just tie that pawn down to h4 and play h3 and not give him any hope. And if let's see, if I play knight takes f6, I'm threatening knight e7 check, winning a rook. Of course, he'll see that. It'll see that. It could play rook f5, forcing me to come back to d5, and I don't think h3 does any good. I can just take it with my knight, and then my objective is, it's going to be pretty easy winning this no matter what I do. I think I can just take the pawn here. I don't need to keep maneuvering around. It just doesn't have any tricks. Knight takes f6, and if anything, if rook f5, I just put the knight back on d5 and go from there. So yeah, there it is. There it is. Okay, so now I have 5 pawns. It has 5 pawns, and I have 2 knights. I'm going to go attack another pawn. And the next step will be I'm going to make a pass pawn, whether I play g4 directly or I stop and maneuver and win the h pawn first. Let's just see what it does to king e3. Okay, good. It's tied its rook down. Now, if I want, I can play g5 now. But what if I go after that pawn of his? And how to do that? Knight g6. I'm just not ready for that. So if I play g4, I get a pass pawn immediately, but it's not clear exactly yet how I advance it. Okay, so if it takes en passant, I take en passant. Now I can play the nuisance move rook g5, and I have to do a little bit of remaneuvering. So I'm going to hold off on doing that. I'm just going to play a squeeze play on this thing, and of course I can also play knight c3 here and go around, win that e pawn. That makes perfect sense. It just can't do anything. It can't get any penetration anywhere. Yeah, I'll just do that. Knight c3. And then knight takes e4. And next I'm going to work on the h pawn. Now he's trying to put the rook on the 8th rank. Well, I can stop that. If I play if anything, I can play knight d3, but I'm kind of tied up with my knight. If I play knight c3, and I can just get it back to d5 again, right? It does fine on that square, right? Yeah, just knight c3. He can't go to the 8th rank. He can't go to the 7th rank, the 6th rank, the 5th rank, the 4th rank. And then my knight's going back to d5, and we go and do it again. Now he gets a check, but that's okay. I go to f2. And the reason I'm going to f2 is to keep him out of the 8th rank. And as I said, now I go back and put my knight on d5 where it was doing fine. And now, like I say, it's just a matter of advancing things so that I get a pass pawn. Now, his rook will have no chance against the rook will have no chance against my king, 2 knights, and 1 pawn. But the question is, can I make it 2 pawns? If I can make it 2 pawns, then the win is even more assured here. So suppose I take this moment now to play king f3. But before I consider king f3, let's look at ways to attack that pawn. To tie him down to that pawn, what I need to do is put 2 knights on it. How do I put 2 knights on it? Well, one can be on f5 and one can be on f3. Or one can be on g6 and one on f3. And I'm not really prepared to do that just yet, but I could be. Another thing to play here is g5 or g4, which gives me a pass pawn directly. Now if he takes with the pawn in passant, I can take with the king. Now my plan is to play h4 and start moving the pawn up the board. Maybe it's the direct way to do it, and trying to win 2 pawns, win that pawn first is just kind of laborious. Like I said, I have to get a couple of attackers on it, and it's not clear at the moment how I do that. But g4 just it forces a pass pawn. It gives me one right now. If he does nothing, I'll push g5, and he's going to lose his h-pawn. So g4, h takes g3. Now I don't want to take with the pawn and let his rook in on the 7th rank. I take with the king. Now he has no entry squares, so he's got to get his king over to help. But his king, it has to step lightly, because there's going to be a plethora of knight forks at his disposal. So if he plays king e6, for instance, he can only go to e5. My knights are stopping him. So h4, king e5, king g4, and look, his king can't get any closer. So he has to go the other way with his king. Those knights just control too many squares. He can't get his king over. Did I miss anything there? Okay. G4, h takes, king takes. Now I said if king d6, I play h4. Now if he can't go to e6 or e7. So if he comes to e5, I play king g4, and he can't get to his king to f6. All he can do is drop his rook back at some point, and I'll play h5, and he checks with the rook, and I check him with my knight on g6, and now his king gets a little closer. But then he starts losing pawns on the other side of the board if I want them, but maybe I don't. I might get his rook active. So this seems like it'll probably work, but I kind of hate having to give myself just an h pawn. I'd rather have a g pawn out of it. It certainly won't lose. I'm not going to lose this game. Okay, so white to move and do the best he can. Well, we know even as it stands now, his king isn't getting conveniently over to the king side, at least through the center, because once it gets to e5, he doesn't really have any place to run with my 2 knights there. Even if I let him in the queen side, he can get as far as d4 and he's stuck. He can't go anymore. So those 2 knights I have are ideally posted. The knight on f4 is guarding things. The king is a fighting piece. Suppose I really like to try to win that pawn on h4 by itself. So king f3. I'm keeping his rook out of e6 where it wants to get the back rank. The idea here is to march the king over to h3 where it's attacking the pawn and tying his rook up. But then I have to swing another knight over there to attack it. It's kind of complicated. Well, when you have time, you take it and relish in what you have. It's a great way to learn endings. I just know G4 wins. I'm just trying to expedite it. Well, I know, if I could see a clear-cut path to winning that H pawn, okay, H3 stops it in its tracks, but then I have to coordinate my guys to attack it. And when I do re-coordinate my guys to attack it, he has possibilities for counterplay to come down with to find a way to get his rook down to the 7th rank. And if he gets his rook to if he's finally able to get his rook to the 7th rank, B2 and B3 fall for me, and his A pawn becomes dangerous. So let's just play squeeze. Let him stay in the game, but he'll never have a chance. And here you just play the slow, careful, deliberate move, and he gets no counterplay. We just squeeze him to death. Okay, so now I know that the H pawn will win. It's just a matter of making it win. Okay, so now he backed up the king. He's materialistic. He doesn't want to give up B6. So now I start making the pawn a threat. Okay, now I don't want him on my 7th rank. It's a squeeze play here. So I put my king on F2. And now the pawn goes up to the 5th rank, where it's even more dangerous. And then we work out developments. Now I can bring my king closer because he's blocking the pawn and he's taking away the check. So I should start bringing my king closer. He needed his king to come over, but I guess its horizon effect prohibits that. And now I'm just going to start bringing my king closer and closer, and make this pawn so much of a threat that he just doesn't have any counterplay, even if he gets a rook on the 7th rank. And I say we're just going to get it closer. Actually, what I can do here pretty much is play knight from G6 to E7, check. He's got to get out of check. I think he has one legal move, and that's King D6. Then I play H6, and he's hard pressed to stop the pawn. I don't see how he stops it. My knight, it'll go to the 7th, and my knight will come back to G6, and I queen it. So knight G6 to, he has two legal moves actually, but this does it. Knight checks, King D6, H6, and now when I play here, the threat is to play knight G8 and queen. So I'll just move the king in, and there's nothing you can do. Now we can play this pretty quickly now and get this video over with. So basically it never had a chance. It never got any counterplay against the weaknesses on B3 and B2, and no use belaboring things. I could probably almost even checkmate this thing with the king and 2 knights, but I won't bother. I'll just surround, no, don't need to do that yet. He gets B5, the B5 trick in. I'll just keep running around, maneuver his king in and back, and get my king a little closer. Okay. Like I say, maybe I can checkmate this thing with force him to make pawn moves, and then checkmate him. Is it worth it? Is it really worth it? I don't know. I'm not trying to be overly clever here. I could accidentally stalemate it too. Of course, I could promote all my pawns to knights and show you how strong 4 knights are against a king. They're terrifying. Okay, you just put them in a box, like from this, the knight where my king is, and E5, D5, E6, and D6. That's checkmate if the king's on either E8 or D8. They just keep moving them up the board like a box, put them back into a box, and you just drive the poor black king nuts. Okay, so I'll just put the knight on f5 and start grabbing pawns. It's going to play fast, so I can just go for a quick mate here. Check. Now, like I say, just a matter of zugzwanging him away from his pawns. Okay, I'm very close to mating it with two knights. Very close. Let's try it. Okay, king c7, king a7. Then, if I move the knight to a4, he has to move the king back to... my knights aren't quite coordinated. I kind of want to do this just for the fun of it since I'm so close. Okay, king c7, king a7. Now, he only has a legal move with his pawn from that position, or put his king back. So what we need to do is, just play king c7. It's better to show it than to explain it. Okay, notice his king doesn't have a6 at his disposal. It only has a pawn move. Okay, it has two legal moves, king a8 and a4. If I take away the pawn move with, say, knight a4, well, then he has king c6. So the way to mate him here, if I have his king in the corner and I have a knight on b6 and c6 and his king is in the corner, it's mate, right? So let's play knight d7, or knight e7. That gives him a king move and it gives him a pawn move, right? So knight a7. They took the king move. Now the next step is to take away, what I got to do is take away the next king move. So like I said, to mate him, if I have my knights on c6 and b6, it's mate. So I've got to work for that. So we've got to force him into it. The computer won't walk into mate if it can avoid it. Okay, so now, and maybe I'm getting it mate anyways. Check. If he goes to a6, it's mate. Right? What am I missing? Checkmate. White is victorious. Okay, I did it with the two knights. But I had help with the c4 pawn. But I got to get the mate in with the two knights. Well, it took an hour and 37 minutes to grind that thing down. Most of it my thinking time because it moves instantly. It's good at level 4. It's not great, but it's a challenge. And the technique I used in this, I hope you'll find it very instructional. A little bit about middle game strategy, about how a computer thinks, about tactics, about various endings, various candidate moves, how to evaluate them. And you can play like this too. I'm not anything special. When I get this thing up a few more levels, it's going to kill me. You'll see it. I don't know how strong it is on level 4. If it's only 1600, then maybe it doesn't look like I'm that good. Well, sorry. I'm just doing the best I can here. My record says otherwise against players of high rating, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks so much for your time for looking at this. Level 5 is going to be a tough one. I can smell it already. There's only 4 more levels left, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I've managed to beat it on the first 4. Hope some of you give it a try. It's free, and especially make an account because then you get to save your game and you won't lose it. So thanks so much again for your time, and look forward to making another video for you soon. Take care. Bye.